And the Pope had a proposal for Jem. He was willing to give Jem everything he wanted. Jem would have an army, he would have troops, he would have full support of the Pope, and he would be waging a battle against his brother. But the only issue was that this battle must be a crusade. And what the Pope really wanted was for Jem to convert to Christianity and lead a crusade against the Ottomans. Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarikhi Tales. If you like our channel, we would love to have your support, and you can support us in multiple different ways. You can go to Patreon and become a paid member. We recently added new perks. Or you can become a paid member of this YouTube channel, or you can use the number on screen if you're in Pakistan. And other than that, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment. All of that good stuff really helps us out as well. Thank you. So now imagine Jem. He's an Ottoman prince. He's said to be insanely handsome, charismatic. He loves hunting. He loves poetry, wine, and women. But to delve into Jem's story, we need to figure out who he is exactly, right? So what you need to know is that Jem is the son of Mehmet II. Now, this is the same Mehmet that conquered the city of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. And now our story begins when Mehmet passes away. Mehmet had two sons at this point who were left to kind of battle it out for the throne. One of them was called Bayezid and the other was Jem. So when Mehmet passes away, now there is this rush to get to the capital, to get to Istanbul, because whoever gets there first and secures the throne becomes the next Sultan. I have an entire separate video on the actual succession battle and all of that. But what happened essentially was that Bayezid was able to take control of Istanbul and Jem wasn't able to get there first. So now Bayezid has become the 8th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and Jem is frustrated and furious. And at this point, he decides that, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I want the throne as well. So now Jem is parked somewhere near the city of Bursa. He decides that with his loyal people, he's going to take over the city of Bursa, and that's exactly what he does. Jem takes over Bursa, which is the old capital of the Ottoman Empire, and not only that, he declares himself Sultan. Then he starts minting coins in his likeness, and even the Friday khutbahs now mention his name as a Sultan in Bursa and the areas around it. So this was kind of like a clear-cut cry of war from Jem, saying that I'm not going to give up. I will take the throne from you, Bayezid. And Bayezid replied to these threats. Now Bayezid sent an army, and the army was able to draw Jem out of the Ottoman Empire. They took back Bursa, and Jem was kind of sent all the way to Syria. He escaped, basically. And this was actually Jem's luck working, because Bayezid didn't want Jem to escape, because as long as Jem is alive, he's always going to be a threat to the Ottoman throne. Bayezid wanted to capture and kill Jem, but Jem got away, and then eventually Jem and his family made their way over to Cairo. Now once Jem gets to Cairo at this point is under another big Muslim empire, which were the Mamluks. But the Mamluks were not as big as the Ottomans, so they needed anything and everything that can help destabilize the Ottomans. They wanted leverage. So Jem was heavily welcomed into Cairo because Jem was equal to leverage against the Ottomans. So Jem and his family went to Cairo, and when you read accounts of his time in Cairo, so Jem is actually taken aback by Cairo, because now Istanbul and Cairo are the two biggest cities in the Mediterranean. And even though Istanbul is bigger, but the issue is that when Jem must have seen it as a kid, Istanbul was heavily depopulated because of the wars of his father. And as an adult, Jem never got to see Istanbul. Now, he did come to Cairo as an adult, and Cairo had not been depopulated. So Jem is taken aback by how busy, how crowded, how vibrant the city of Cairo is, and he really likes it. So now at this point, Jem is already doing something that almost none of the Ottoman princes got to do, which was travel abroad and explore. Now the Mamluk Sultan at this point in time was called Katabe, and as I mentioned, they had welcomed Jem into Cairo and they treated him and his family with a lot of respect, and they would dine with Jem every night. And while Jem was there, the month of Ramadan was actually going on, and they would break their fasts together every evening. Now, when you look at it from Jem's perspective, Jem actually had the perfect ally because who is better to take back an empire than another empire at your backing, right? But whenever Jem approached the topic of troops and plans to take back his throne, Ketabe would kind of defer. He would kind of deflect these questions with things like, oh, I have to talk to my advisors first, or let's wait till the end of Ramzan, or any other kind of, deflection that was possible. And Jem kind of soon picked up on this. He realized that this guy is really not, ready right now to take back the empire and help me. So Jem decides that, what, I'm going to go on Hajj and I'm going to perform the pilgrimage of Hajj while I'm here. Because at this point in time, the Hijaz, Makkah, Medina, and all that area, modern day Saudi Arabia, almost, was under the rule of the Mamluks. So while Jem was here, he thought, let's go for Hajj. And in his mind, even though there is definitely a religious aspect that, it's a pillar of Islam and I should do it, but a lot of historians talk about how for him, this was also kind of a political move. Because think about it. All Muslims from all around the world come to this place for the pilgrimage of Hajj. And he was hoping that meeting all those people and having them see him perform the Hajj would kind of portray him as like a caliph of Islam. So in December 1481, Jem embarked towards Makkah and Medina to perform the pilgrimage of Hajj. And as I mentioned before and in the title, Jem turns out to be the only Ottoman prince that ever performs Hajj. And the Hajj that Jem does perform actually does turn out to be what he expected. It became something like a modern day publicity tour. It said that from the moment his caravan arrived in Makkah, there would be crowds of people gathering around him and his people, and they would follow him wherever they went, and they would ask for words of wisdom and even prayers. And when Jem went to Medina, it said that he actually inspired the people of Medina to rebuild the Masjid-e-Nabwi, which actually was struck by lightning. One of the minarets was struck by lightning a couple of months ago, and a huge portion of the masjid actually burned down. Now, even a few centuries later, when in that area people talked about the rebuilding of the masjid, that was credited to Jem. So he really did leave a huge impression on people. So Jem was quite pleased with how the entire, thing turned out. And once he returned from Hajj, Jem actually decided to reach out to his brother, Bayezid, and he wrote him a letter. And in the letter, he actually wrote a verse. And the verse goes something like this. While you lie on a bed of roses in sheer happiness, why should I be covered by ashes in sorrow's furnace? If one observes piety, shouldn't justice favor him? Is that not a legitimate right claimed by the pilgrim? To this, Bayezid actually sends a reply back with a couplet of his own, and he says, since time immemorial we were given this state, why then are you unwilling to accept preordained fate? I went on the pilgrimage, you say, to advance your claim. Why then are these worldly gains and sovereignty your chief aim? So he kind of bites Jem back, saying, well, if you're so pious, well, let go of all the worldly things, But that really wasn't something that Jem was ready to do. And now he was back from Hajj, he had killed his time, and Jem knew that the longer he would wait to take back the throne from Bayezid, the more difficult it's gonna get, the more Bayezid will be able to cement himself as the ruler, and then Jem might not have his chance. So by this point, Jem is kind of tired and he knows that he needs to do something. And again, the Mamluks, they're kind of deflecting his questions and they're willing to give him support, but only to a certain extent. They don't want to go all in against the Ottomans. They only want to go in as far to keep up the tensions between the brothers, to keep Bayezid on edge. But Jem doesn't want that. Jem wants to go further. So Jem decides that, okay, I have a half-hearted support from the Mamluks. Now I'm going to reach inside the empire. Because Jem was previously a governor of the area of Konya, and he had contacts and people he knew from his time in the empire. So he reached out to the Qasims, who were a principality in Anatolia, and he reached out to them and asked them to help him against Bayezid. Now the Qasims were already looking to kind of gain more power, and they pounced at this opportunity. They were like, let's go, let's do something about this. So Jem, together with the Qasims, kind of made a plan to go back into the Ottoman Empire secretly, and then they would do some stuff. But just for the record, the Mamluk Sultan, Ketebe, he's actually against this move. He tells Jem, don't go back into the empire. Don't kind of try to start a civil war. It's not going to work. Let's think about something else. But at the same time, you have to realize he's not really thinking for Jem, He's also thinking of his own interests, what he wants. Jem doesn't listen. Jem has had enough with these people. And Jem says that, my family's going to stay here with you. You've been really nice to them. And I'm going to go ahead and do what I've planned with the Qasims. So Jem sneaks back into the Ottoman Empire. Now, Jem and the Qasims together, they gather troops, they gather supplies, they gather money, and they've kind of made a plan that, we're going to get together and we're going to take over the city of Konya. And in Jem's mind, this is the first step. He's going to take over Konya, and then he's going to take over several other cities, and there's going to be a series of battles with Bayezid, and eventually he'll take the throne back. But what actually happens is that when Jem and the Qasims attack Konya in May 1482, their forces are beaten back within hours by the new governor of Konya, who is Abdullah Bayezid's son. And at this point, Jem is like, oh my god, this is not what I expected. But he doesn't want to give up anytime soon. He decides that, okay, we couldn't get Konya. They had more reinforcements. They had a much better governor than I thought. So we're going to take Ankara now. Let's go over there. But while Jem was on his way there, he heard news that Bayezid has found out that Jem is in the empire after the battle, of course. And Bayezid himself, along with his army, is now coming, and he's going to, take care of Jem himself. And that really scares Jem. And he's like, no, that's going to be a suicide mission. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to run out of the empire once again. But before Jem actually leaves the empire, what happens is that Bayezid is actually able to send a messenger ahead of the army, and the messenger reaches up to Jem and he offers him a deal. Bayezid says that, Jem, forget all of this. Let's start over. What we'll do is we're going to give you a good sum of money, sum of gold yearly, and we're going to set you up comfortably in Jerusalem. You can live the rest of your life over there and just accept that I'm Sultan and we're done, that's it. But Jem, at this point, he's quite skeptical because, let's be honest, Jem has every reason to be skeptical because this very well could have been a ruse by Bayezid to capture Jem and kill him. Because that's the only way to secure his throne. Because in Ottoman succession, the throne doesn't always go to the firstborn son. Anybody, any heir, male heir of Osman can claim the throne. So historically, brothers have ended up killing brothers or locked them away to secure their rule. So Jem is skeptical and Jem is like, yeah, no thank you. I will not be coming easily and I'm not gonna, accept this offer. So now let's rewind a bit. What's happened is that before Jem left for this mission, while he was still in Cairo, he realized obviously that the Mamluks are really not going to give him the full support that he's looking for, So he realizes that he needs another ally. Now he thinks about Persia, but Persia is very fragmented at this point. There are a lot of factions within it. So he thinks about Europe now, because Europe, none of the states in Europe are anywhere close to the size of the Ottomans. But all of them are scared of the Ottomans and they're all desperate. So Jem thought that he could find an ally within Europe to kind of help him take back the throne from Bayezid. And he wrote letters here and there. The first letter was to Venice. They said no. The next letter he wrote to Knights Hospitalier of St. John, who ruled the island of Rhodes. Now the Knights actually replied back and they were like, yes, we're all in. So when all of this went south, the taking back of Konya and all of that, Jem is stuck in the Ottoman Empire and he needs a way out. He decides that he's not going to go back to Cairo to his family. He's going to go to the island of Rhodes, where the Knights have kind of told him that they're going to support him. So in the middle of July 1482, Jem boards a ship which is going to take him to the island of Rhodes. And he doesn't know it at this time, but this was the last time that Jem would ever be within the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman prince Jem is on his way to Rhodes, and he's got all these plans that, okay, I'm gonna ask them for troops, for ships, for supplies, and for diplomatic protection. And we're gonna make a plan to take back the throne from Bayezid, and we need to be quick. But Jem doesn't realize this immediately, but he's about to become a hostage, a bargaining chip for the knights. Now, to understand what the knights were thinking and why, we have to kind of talk about who they were. So the Knights Hospitaller of St. John was basically a crusading order. So they were basically knights that would gather and they would fight crusades, and their ultimate goal was to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. But at this point in time, the island of Rhodes had been attacked by Mehmet a couple of years ago, and Mehmet had wreaked havoc on the island, their defenses, and their troops. So they don't have the capacity to fight the Ottoman Empire at the time, and what they want is to buy time and they want money. And that's where Jem came in. They want to rebuild themselves. Now, Jem had initially thought that the knights agreed to support him because they had physically met Jem. They knew him personally from negotiations a couple of years ago. But turns out the knights had their own motives, right? But it's kind of ironic to see that how quickly alliances changed during that time, because the island of Rhodes was now welcoming wholeheartedly the son of the man who had wreaked havoc on their island just a couple of years ago. Now, while Jem was in Rhodes, we actually have accounts from the Vice Chancellor of the Knights, and he talks about Jem a couple of times. And he says that Jem always looked a little bit sad and a little bit pensive. He was always worried about things. He was very fidgety. He would never stay in one place too long. But still, according to the VC, Jem never lost his aristocratic dignity. And according to him, that is what enabled him, and I quote, to swim every day in the sea naked, without prudishness in sight of everybody. While in Rhodes, Jem actually spent his time delving in luxury, having good food, drinking wine, and then he killed his knights with a slave called Almeida, which he purchased from the local market. So Jem has kind of figured out that where he stands with the knights, and he's not really happy about it. And the knights, and it's almost been about a month, 34 days, while Jem has been in the island of Rhodes, and the knights at this point have gotten a bit uneasy. They've had a new realization. What if what they're thinking of as a bargaining chip, Jem, what if Bayezid loses his calm and he decides that, what? To hell with everything, I'm going to invade Rhodes and I'm going to take care of Jem, and that's it. So they decide that they need to secure themselves first before they talk to Bayezid. And what they do is that 34 days after Jem has been on the island, they decide to send Jem to one of their own castles in France. Jem is against this. Jem doesn't want to go through with it, but Jem doesn't have an option. He's a hostage at this point. So on the 1st of September 1482, the knights sent Jem all the way to France. And on the same day, they actually dispatch an envoy and send him to the court of Bayezid. And there, they strike a deal with the Ottoman Sultan. The deal kind of turns out to be that Bayezid will be paying the knights 45,000 Venetian gold ducats annually to take care of Jem and to hold Jem in France. And they also made him promise not to attack the island of Rhodes or Otranto. From Bayezid's perspective, this was a win-win deal. Because first of all, he had no intention of attacking Rhodes or Otranto. And this was perfect. He was basically paying the knights to keep his brother, who was a threat to his throne, far away from the empire. So Bayezid was like, take my money. And just for the record, this amount of money for Bayezid was also kind of nothing at this point, because the Ottoman Empire was massive and massively rich. But for the knights, this money meant a lot. Now, Jem didn't know exactly how much of a hostage he is until he actually landed in France, in Nice. And when he landed there, it's only then that he found out that this deal had been struck between the knights and his brother. And Jem was devastated. Now, just for curiosity's sake, can you guys guess how old Jem is at this point in time? While listening to the story, what age of a man were you imagining living through all of this? I'll tell you the answer in a bit, but give me your best guess down below. Now, just like in Rhodes, Jem was given a comfortable stay in France. He was staying at one of the mansions of an acquaintance of the knights. And this guy was a Genoese merchant. He was quite rich. And if we were to believe French accounts, they say that on the first night that Jem stayed within the mansion, the Genoese merchant actually sent his eldest daughter to Jem that night to sleep with him. And the consecutive nights, he would send his other daughters and then eventually his nieces. Now, the accounts basically kind of portray that what this Genoese merchant was hoping was that Jem would fall for one of these girls and one of them would end up marrying in the Ottoman royal family with Jem. But that doesn't really happen. Jem does, I think, sleep with them according to the accounts. But no marriage or nothing like that takes place. Instead, when Jem eventually was given a little bit more freedom, because initially he was put in kind of like a lax house arrest. So eventually, when he was given a little bit more freedom, the same accounts go on to say that he moved on to the prostitutes of the city and then eventually boys from noble families. Now, we have to bear in mind that this is coming from French accounts, and as is with all history, you don't really know exactly what happened, So we take everything with a grain of salt, but it could have also happened because Jem did have a reputation even while he was in the Ottoman Empire. So you never know. And by the way, Jem at this point in time was only 23 years old. It's quite young, So now Jem is kind of stuck in France, right? And he's kind of given up. He's frolicking his time away and all of that is happening. But in the background, other things are brewing because by this point, now the Mamluks and the Ottomans are kind of at loggerheads and there've been a little bit of a skirmish here and there between both of these empires. And at the same time, remember I told you that Jem left his family, which included his mother, his wives, and a couple of concubines and children back in Cairo. So his mother had been constantly lobbying for his return. She wanted her son back. And because the Mamluks were now having issues with the Ottomans, they also wanted Jem back as leverage. So what they did was that they reached out to the knights themselves and they were like, you know what, listen to us, make a deal with us now. The Mamluks offered the knights their support in battle, their troops, whenever there's another war that they need help in, and the Mamluks offered to pay 100,000 gold ducats for Jem, which is almost double what Bayezid was paying. But the knights thought about it and they were like, no, because they're scared of Bayezid a lot more than they are of the Mamluks. And just like there's this other whole scenario brewing in the Middle East, right, with the Mamluks and Jem's mother, there's also another scenario which is brewing all the way across in Europe. And the Pope is now involved. The Pope at this point in time is Pope Innocent VIII. And what the Pope does is that he orders the Knights of Hospitaller, he says that I need you guys to hand over Jem from France to Italy to Rome. And I'm doing this for the good of all Christendom. Now, according to the historian Mikhail, the Pope was trying to kind of orchestrate this huge alliance. He was trying to put together a three-way alliance: Rome, Hungary, which was a huge adversary of the Ottomans within the Balkans, and Jem against Bayezid. And the Pope was kind of making these grand plans and all of them centered around Jem. So he asked the knights to send Jem to Rome. And the knights, because they were a crusading order, they're Christians, of course they obey the Pope and they send Jem over. But what happens is that when Jem lands in Italy, there's something in the air. This is the time period that the Renaissance is going on in Europe. Now, Renaissance means rebirth. This was a period in European history roughly from the 14th to the 17th century where there was a revival of literature, of philosophy, of sciences, of education and values. And I've got to mention that a lot of the texts that the Europeans were reviving now, the ancient Greek and Roman texts, they were actually burned down and lost to the Europeans. But they were using the copies that the Muslims had actually made of those texts earlier on, from between the 9th to the 12th century. The same books had been translated by the Muslims into different languages a couple of centuries ago, and now the Europeans were using those books to kind of retranslate them back into their own languages and regain this knowledge that they had lost. So another issue was that, when we think of the Renaissance and we taught about it, it's all about the education, the values, people, the thinking was changing. But what history easily fails to mention because of its Eurocentric views is that a lot of the Renaissance was driven as hatred against the Ottomans. And I know it's a strong word, but even famous Renaissance historians like James Hankins actually talks about this. And he says, the humanists wrote far more often and at far greater length about the Turkish menace and the need for crusade than they did about such better known humanist themes as true nobility, liberal education, the dignity of man, or the immortality of the soul. So basically, the point is that when Jem arrived in Italy, in Rome, there was this air of Renaissance going on, and even though the Eurocentric view portrays that it was, all about education and learning, but a huge part of that was actually hate and, like bad mouthing the Ottomans. So Jem would be hearing all that, and that really affected him because the people at that time in Europe, they were really scared of the Ottomans because they were a huge threat to them. So what happened when Jem was actually hear all this hatred being spit out for his religion and his people was that all of this acted as a catalyst for change. And Jem, for the first time in his life, the irony is that while he was in the heart of Christendom in the Vatican, sources say that Jem had become a very pious and devout Muslim for the first time in his life because of all the opposing opinions that he would hear from people about his faith and all of that, that had like an unprecedented kind of an effect. Now, the word devout obviously has its own definitions for everybody, so keep that in mind. But Jem's faith had been kind of strengthened, and we have some instances which kind of prove that, there were certain lines that now Jem was drawing, which the previous Jem wasn't willing to draw. Now, 10 days after arriving in Rome, Jem actually met with the Pope, and the Pope had a proposal for Jem. He was willing to give Jem everything he wanted. Jem would have an army, he would have troops, he would have full support of the Pope, and he would be waging a battle against his brother. But the only issue was that this battle must be a crusade. And what the Pope really wanted was for Jem to convert to Christianity and lead a crusade against the Ottomans. Now, historians talk about how it's so weird that at this point in time, Ottomans are such a big threat that when the Pope wants to lead a crusade, he's not talking about a crusade against Islam, which is how the general sense is used, for crusade. But he wants a crusade only against the Ottomans, and he wants Jem to convert to Christianity and lead this crusade. And to this, it's said that Jem kind of vowed in front of the Pope. He made an oath that never in his life is he ever going to help the Christians against any Muslim empire, be it the Ottoman Empire or any other empire. So, for the first time in his life, Jem was being offered the throne, the power that he had been running after for so long. But turns out this is not how he wanted it. And this is where he drew the line. He decided that no, he's quoted to have said that he will not do this even for the rule of the whole world. So Jem's love for power and the throne was not above his feelings for his own faith, which, as I mentioned, were strengthened when he came into Italy and with his exposure in Europe. Jem instead asked the Pope to, just let me go back to Cairo, to my family, let me live out my days in peace. I'm done with the battle for the throne, it's over. But the Pope was like, no, and he sent Jem back to jail. Now, by this point, Jem was almost 29 years old and he had been on the run for almost a decade, and he was tired. And he wanted to just, he gave up. He was like, fine, I don't want the throne, I don't want anything. And he actually wrote a couple of letters to his half-brother Bayezid, and he said that, I pledge my allegiance to you, I'm loyal to you, I don't want the throne, all I want is to be able to live out the rest of my days in a Muslim land. It doesn't have to be the Ottoman Empire. Take me away from here, take me back to Cairo, or if that's too dangerous, India, Iran, anywhere in the Middle East will do, just a Muslim land. That's all I want. He even told Bayezid in one of the letters that he forgives him for killing Jem's 3-year-old son. So at this point, the letters do sound sincere, but still you never know. But Jem kept on writing to Bayezid, but Bayezid didn't want to take his chances. He didn't want to give him the opportunity. And he didn't think that Jem was being sincere. He didn't, take any actions to help him. Now, on the other hand, even though Jem has said no, the Pope really wants a crusade. The Pope is like, we're gonna have a crusade against the Ottomans. So now, in a surprise move, he actually reached out to another Muslim entity, the Mamluks, and he says, you know what? We want to have a crusade against the Ottomans. Will you join us? The Mamluks were like, okay, we can talk about it, but one of our major conditions is that we want Jem back. The Pope was like, not going to happen. And the Mamluks were like, we're not going to help you with the Ottomans. So that was done. Then the Pope reaches out to other principalities in Europe and he's like, okay, let's lead a crusade against the Ottomans. And all of them wrote back saying, no, because it's a suicide mission at this point in time. The Ottomans are way too powerful. We will definitely lose. So no. Also, all of Europe is still pretty shaken up because of the fall of Constantinople, which happened in 1453. So they're like, no, we're not going to start a crusade against them at this point in time. So now the Pope has tried here, there, everywhere, and he's out of options. So what he does at this point is that he reaches out to the Ottomans themselves. And he sends an envoy to Bayezid and he says that let's strike a deal. He basically did the same things that the knights were doing. And he was like, you know what, we're going to keep Jem away from your throne, but for a feast. And Bayezid was like, okay. Sure. So they struck a deal and they exchanged a couple of things. Bayezid is said to have handed back an artifact to Rome, which was a lance, which is said to have pierced Christ during the crucifixion. So he sent that artifact back to Rome and he also paid 120,000 Venetian gold ducats for the next 3 years of taking care of Jem. And this money was basically nothing to the Ottomans, but for the papacy, this was a year's worth of income. So they were thrilled with this money coming in. And now the Pope also asked, as a formality more than anything, he asked Bayezid that, you have to give Christian pilgrims safe passage for their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. You have to give them freedom of religion in your empire. But the thing was that Bayezid was already doing these things. The Christians in their Ottoman Empire had the protection of religion. Their religious places were protected. And the pilgrims of the minorities were actually given a much bigger protection for their pilgrimages. So that was already happening. So Bayezid was like, okay, no problem. And the Pope was like, you can't attack Italy like your father did. So Bayezid was like, no problem, because he wasn't planning to do that anyways. So this again was a win-win situation for Bayezid, Jem was being kept away for him. Now Jem is a prisoner of the Pope, right? But what happens is that in July 1492, this Pope passes away. And just FYI, this is the same year, actually a week or two after this, in the same year, Christopher Columbus leaves for his first voyage across the Pacific. So just so you know where we are at in the timeline of the world, that's what's happening in the background. So now a new Pope has come to power and he's called Alexander VII. And this Pope turned out to be a really bad Pope politically and religiously because he had a number of mistresses, a line of illegitimate children, and then because of all of these things, many critics throughout Europe. One of this Pope's biggest adversity in Europe was the King of France, Charles VIII. And what happened was that 2 years later, in 1494, Charles actually invades Rome. And when he does, he captures a very important thing, Jem. And with his army, he takes Jem down to Naples. Now this King Charles, was actually from a very influential family. His family had links all throughout Europe to very influential people. And Bayezid, as usual, was still keeping an eye on Jem and his whereabouts. When he found out about this invasion and the capture of Jem and all of that, he was threatened because he realized that Jem is now in the hands of a powerful army, powerful king, and they're inching closer and closer to Istanbul. So Bayezid started to take actions. Military reinforcements were sent to the western border, a fleet was sent to the Adriatic, and a number of other things were put into motion, all on the whim that Jem might be inching closer to the Ottoman Empire. So even 14 years after Jem had been on the run, Bayezid was still so heavily threatened by Jem that even whim that he might come closer set into motion all these military deployments. But luckily for Bayezid, he had really nothing to worry about, because unfortunately when Jem reached Naples, he got really sick. First his eyelids, then his throat and his face, all of them swelled up. And it's said that he probably had pneumonia. And King Charles was quite worried because he had a lot of plans made and the main aspect of those plans was Jem. So he had his best physicians take care of him, and it's even said that Charles would come and visit Jem often. And during one of his visits, he says to Jem, and somebody recorded this, he said that, "Be in good spirits, my lord. As soon as you get well, you will find freedom and salvation. So don't be upset any longer about being a prisoner." Now, when the king left his room, Jem reportedly said about this, "Thank God the words freedom and salvation enter my ears. I have always prayed thus: O God, if the infidels want to take me on the pretext of marching on Muslims, then don't let me see those days and take my soul first." After this, Jem actually lapsed into a coma, and he woke up a couple of times, only long enough once to hear the letter of his mother. And then, at the age of 35, on February 25th, 1495, Jem passed away. Jem's death actually served as a major blow to the plans that the Europeans had regarding him for the Ottoman Empire. But there you go, this was the interesting epic story of this Ottoman prince, Jem, who had such a weird life where he was the only one who ever embarked on Hajj, probably one of the few Ottoman princes who ever met the Pope. The Pope wanted him to convert to Christianity, and he had this whole scandalous side to his life as well. There was a lot going on with this prince, and I thought it's a story worth sharing. So let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.